So I've been spending quite a bit of time, recently, I said I was a plant pathologist. I've actually been spending a lot more time as an entomologist, which I am not, but been learning a lot as we've been dealing with the concerns surrounding the use of pesticides, in particular neonicotinoid or neonics. I'll just call them neonics for the rest of this presentation, and pollinators, bees in particular. So just jump on into this. So for one, it is an important debate for us to have. We hear in the media broadly that, can everyone hear me okay, by the way? Okay. That there are these tremendous concerns about the numbers of pollinators and bees, and are they in decline, and those sorts of things. And we know as part of ag, you know, our growers are a proud part of agriculture, that bees are really important to agriculture. We use them for pollination services. Beekeepers are also part of ag. It's kind of like they tend livestock in many ways, we can think of it, and they're producing honey. We've heard things about, you know, approximately 1 of every 3 bites we take comes from a pollinated crop, and we have some of that reflected here in the food that we're having today. So no matter what, if there are questions out there, we need to talk about it and be in a better place because of answering those questions. So there's the science, but then there's also the emotional debate, the emotional concerns surrounding this issue. When we think about bees, you know, yes, they are insects and they buzz around and sometimes we get stung. But also I mentioned the pollination services, how important they are to our food system, and also to nature, right? They live in symbiosis with the plants that we love. So if they're all connected in this way, we all kind of look at bees as an indicator of the health of our environment. It's kind of impossible not to. So when we hear things about bees at the brink, a million reasons bees are dying, and the like, and you all know you're trying to sometimes create titles that draw attention to an issue, bring in more readership. We all do that, and that's also reflected here. And it certainly gets people's attention and gets them worried. So it's important, though, as emotional as this issue is, that we do have to, especially as an industry, look to the science and try to follow the science. So we look at the numbers of bees, and really there's very little data. As native pollinators, we know practically nothing about as far as their numbers, their health, and things like that. The numbers that we usually see referenced are really honeybees. So these are managed bees, not our native bees. These are European honeybees that are brought in, you know, for a couple of centuries now, people have been dedicating their lives to them and breeding them for honey and pollination services, as I've mentioned. So what we normally see when a presentation is done on this topic is that graph will go from, and I'll just give you, it's hard to see, it goes from 1994, I'm sorry, from 1945 to 2007, okay? What I've done is add in the numbers from 2014. This was released last spring. And basically, they do this. This is the USDA's National Agricultural Statistical Survey. Every year, they go around to beekeepers who keep more than 5 hives and say, how many hives do you have? And then that's where they get their numbers. And so what we know is, yes, from you go look back to World War II, there were a lot more people keeping a lot more hives. And then after that, there's kind of, you begin that decline. Well, why? Well, really the reasons are we have changing demographics. Fewer people working in agriculture, more people working in urban and different career paths, so fewer people working in this area. Also, during World War II, honey production, beeswax, they were all deemed as vital by the United States government. We needed them for our war efforts because honey as a sugar alternative, and beeswax is actually a coating on armaments and also on clothing to prevent you know, things from getting wet, essentially. And from there, you actually see sort of this decline in demand. But what's happened in more recent years is the increase in need for pollination services. Maybe some of you have heard about the almond crops in California. So almonds, every January, February, the almond industry now, because it's grown so much, requires about 1.8 million hives. About 2/3 of all of our hives in the United States go to just a few counties in California for pollination services. So we're seeing the numbers increase because demand is there. So it's important to look at, it's not so much we're going down. Actually, the numbers from 2014 were equivalent of 1997. So it's really not that this industry is at the brink. But I also want to say, before I go into a little bit about these reports, is that it's not to suggest that beekeepers aren't having a heck of a hard time out there, because they are. And they do have higher losses than they have in recent decades. So why? What are the reasons behind that? Well, again, we need to look to the science. And when we do that, we really can look to these 3 comprehensive recent reports that kind of include some original research, but also accumulate research from various areas and say, okay, let's try to really analyze and look at this. And we have here in the bottom left, it's the USDA's Stakeholder report from the fall of 2012. In the middle is United Kingdom report from 2013, pretty much from their equivalent of our USDA. And then the one on the top right is from the Australian government's equivalent of EPA. And they all come to essentially the same kind of conclusions. That bees are getting hammered from all angles. and the reality is that there's kind of a few that are probably bigger than others, but certainly we know that, especially in the United States, Varroa mite. So this was a mite not known to occur, and it wasn't identified in the United States until 1987. And that mite carries many viruses and diseases along with it that it's able to then pass along to the bees. I was actually part of a U.S. House of Representatives congressional hearing on this topic, and Dr. Jeff Pettis, the lead researcher for USDA's Agricultural Research Service on bees, when asked by members of Congress, Dr. Pettis, can you tell us what is the biggest impactor on the health of our honeybees? And he said, without hesitating, Varroa mite. And he held up a grapefruit. I'll never forget. He held up a grapefruit and he said, if you can imagine a parasite the size of a grapefruit being attached to you, and then potentially multiple, and then actually living off of you, feeding off of you, that's what it would be like to live, and passing viruses. That's what it would be like to live with a parasite of this size, because for a bee, these things are large. For us, they're small. But then you also have things like forage and habitat. We know in agriculture, especially in row crop agriculture, they're much more successful at growing from hedgerow to hedgerow. A lot fewer weeds out there, and weeds were important resources for bees, and that's just not there as much anymore. There's also the practices of the beekeepers themselves. Well, beekeepers have, as I mentioned, there's a lot of challenges here. So they're using some products to try to maintain their hives and keep their pest populations down, dealing with mites and some fungal diseases. Nosema is a big problem. But this is not to detract from, there is a role for our crop uses of pesticides as well. When we look at our insecticide use, we use them to deal with pests that are insects. Bees are insects. If the two come in contact and they interact at a sufficient level, can they kill bees? Absolutely, no doubt. So we need to be smarter and be responsible as an industry, work with our partners in the bee community, and I think together we can really kind of figure out a path where we can manage our pest problems and also kind of create a better environment for them to be working and thriving their businesses. So I kind of hit on some of these already. I'll just show you some quick photos. Sorry, it's during lunch. I didn't realize that when I included the slide. I'll skip quickly, but anyway, that's a Varroa mite, just to give you a sense. This is tracheal mites. There are some now varieties. So tracheal mites are kind of like, think of them as our lungs. Insects breathe through their trachea, which are these little tubes that kind of go to the exoskeleton. They're in and out. And so these mites actually can live in there. It's really more of a problem for some native bee species. It was a huge problem for managed bees, but now there's some varieties out there that have been bred to resist some of these concerns. But they also are very commonly spread viruses. Mentioned forage and habitat. I mean, it pretty much is self-explanatory there. And then pesticides. Okay, so we can't deny, can these treatments, when they interact with bees, can they kill them? Yes. So how is it when there's all these issues going on? Okay, we have so many factors. Why has the focus become really on neonics? Well, it's kind of because neonics, think of it a little bit kind of like the Frankenstein thing. Anything new can be scary to some people. So neonics or neonicotinoid really comes from the word, you can see the word nicotine in there, right? Nicotine for millennia, we've known it's a very useful insecticide, but it's also pretty darn toxic to us. So neo comes from, you guys are writers, you probably know this better than I am, but it comes from the Greek root of new. So it's a new tweaked version essentially of nicotine. What it does is it maintains the ability to inhibit the receptors of some of the nerve systems of insects, but it really has a very low toxicity to animals, including humans and our pets. And that's why we use them in flea collars and things like that. And another reason why I mentioned that they're new, well, they really, as far as an insecticide go, they're the new kid on the block. They were the first new class of insecticides that the chemical industry came along in about 50 years. So we're always looking for new classes because we want to have the rotation, the ability to control pests. You can't rely on one thing because they evolved out of it. They kind of able to develop ways to not respond any longer to those insecticides. So we try to keep a rotation, and that's why they're so important. And another reason why neonics have really become the focus is they are the most commonly used insecticide in the world. So they become the target. And this kind of started certainly in the European Union. There was a moratorium put in place on their use. Something to keep in mind is in the European Union, they practice an approach, it's actually in their statutes on science and the environment, of a precautionary principle. The idea is that essentially until you really know that all the concerns are alleviated and we've answered all the potential questions, you really don't move forward. And that's really never been the approach of the United States. It's always been kind of like, if we don't move forward, the absence of progress doesn't mitigate risk either. And it's something that I would butcher it if I tried quoting it, but John F. Kennedy kind of had a similar quote about, or he had a quote to that point. Essentially, just not making progress because of every concern. It doesn't mean that you're not dealing with the concerns you have at that time, and so you are also accepting a level of risk. So what happened here, really what kind of opened up a whole Pandora's box on this issue, was started with a large bee kill in Oregon in 2013, happened around May, June of 2013. And in that case, we had an applicator who used an off-label application. They didn't use it as it is legally expected or required for them to use it. They sprayed linden trees that were in flower during the day while being actively visited by bumblebees. And so when they did that, a large number of bees died. And it was an awful situation. Compounded by the fact that the Xerces Society, which is an invertebrate conservation group, their headquarters was just 15 miles up the road. So they got active very quickly on the topic. And what this photo right here is of a gentleman doing a memorial service in honor of those bees. You can see the backdrop of those linden trees that were kind of sacked and in black mesh. And so they had a kind of a media event saying we're memorializing the bees. And this kind of continued to get this topic rolling in the national media. So what do? Yes, we see incredible public pressure on this topic. EPA is feeling it. Certainly other federal agencies. The members of Congress are feeling it. We're feeling it. But I really think it's important, we all think it's important, that we stay focused on the science, because we can't move away from and leave important progress, things that take us forward, because we're just general fear without understanding. So again, we need to look to the science. So why is it that we use these products? What's so important about these neonics? Why don't we just, everyone's worried about them, or people are worried about them, why don't you get rid of them and be done? Well, the reality is that they are the compounds that help us be most successful in controlling our most problematic pests. So here are some examples of invasive species that likely everyone in this room is very familiar with. We have Asian Longhorn beetle. Okay, it's established in certain states in the United States. We know that if able to just spread, this pest can decimate a huge number. It has a broad host range, but our maple trees, I mean, they just hammer maples. If they were to make their way into Vermont or New Hampshire, those kind of, I don't know if anyone goes up there for the fall, but those lovely fall dries where we see those vibrant yellows and oranges and reds of our sugar maples, gone. It has the possibility of doing that. Emerald ash borer. Everyone here I know knows this one. And you know, if you're driving down the highway in a spring, we're going to see it pretty soon, where you'll see these trees, everything's looking good, but then all of a sudden you look back a little further and you see these other trees completely naked of leaves, nothing there, likely an ash. And then Hemlock woolly Adelgid. I don't know if this is such an issue here, but I know in the east, it basically occurs from south of the Smokies and it's working its way up into Maine. And this tree, you know, kind of does well in the ravines of our forests, also when we use them in our landscapes. And this specifically in the Great Smoky Mountains, they recognized that this tree was going to be gone from the Great Smokies. When we think of the Smokies, that sort of misty essence coming in, you know, coming through the ravines and in between the mountains, a lot of what causes that is actually the hemlocks that help protect and keep that air moist and cool. And so what happened in the Smokies is that some scientists came along, and with the National Park Service, they said, let's try applying some insecticide that gets pulled into the plant, kills the hemlock, but really has little to no impact on what else is going on out there. And the product they used was a neonic. And they had about, you know, Dr. Rich Cowles from the Connecticut Agricultural Experimental Station said that they estimated they had about 5 million hemlocks in that forest there. They treated about 150,000. And according to him, he thinks that basically the only ones left are the ones that they treated. And I actually had a really great conversation over at the table I was sitting. Japanese beetle. Okay, I grew up in New Jersey. My father loved his shrub roses. This was just the bane of his existence, Japanese beetle. But beyond that, there's a Japanese beetle harmonization plan that the National Plant Board, along with industry, has worked together on how to prevent the movement, the further movement of this pest. So we have it certainly east of the Mississippi, a lot of it west of the Mississippi, not so much. And in order for a grower to ship material from one location that has it to a location that doesn't have it or it's not established, you have to follow that harmonization plan. One of the important tools of that is a neonic. So it's not just, you know, we use them because it's in the toolbox, let's use it. It's part of management plans and structures that the scientists say these are our best tools for dealing with these things. And actually, it's required as far as federal and state law in many cases, that our growers, in order to ship across state lines, have to use them. Another thing to think about, and I don't know that many do, is that our bedding plants, about 90% of our bedding plants start offshore. They come in as cuttings. So in order for that to happen, they must go through a plant inspection station, which is a part of APHIS. As I mentioned earlier, the USDA's Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. And they're inspected. And if they find pests on them, basically they're rejected. That's a growing operation, I believe, in Guatemala. So about here I have 1.5 billion cuttings coming through. What essentially happens, if they find a pest, there's basically a 0% tolerance. So that plant material is either fumigated, which usually kills it, or it's just destroyed outright. A lot of resources going into trying to bring that material in. The other thing is, we do have major concerns that if we're taking some products out of the rotation, resistance development, we could be inviting new pests. And as we mentioned before, we don't want any new, we want to maintain the environment we have and prevent new invasive species from coming in. And we think that some of this works against us. Another reason, I thought I had this slide, I don't have it here, but to keep in mind, neonics make us very successful at actually reducing the pesticide, the amounts of pesticides we use and the number of applications. So that's good for our workers, and it's certainly we see as good for the environment. The reason is we're much more successful in integrated pest management. Because this stuff gets pulled into the plant material, we can use it, but then also use biological controls. So you think of like some of the ladybugs or some of the parasitoid wasps or predatory mites. We can use them, especially in greenhouse production, and it can work in concert with this chemistry, keeping down those pest concerns. You take this out of the mix, and all of a sudden now you're using other chemistries that are foliar applied, not systemic activity. You can't really use your biological controls as well. And also you're having much more interaction with workers and eventually the people who are buying the products. So our challenge, federal, on the kind of going through the list, federal legislation, not so much. There's been a bill introduced in the House kind of going after neonics, trying to talk about a moratorium similar to what we see in the European Union. That bill we know is not going to go anywhere. We do think there could be some helpful bills coming through that would actually kind of, in partnership with beekeeper organizations, try to help them deal with some of their concerns. And those are things like forage, making federal lands available for them to kind of improve the health of their hives, and also on research. They have lots of questions. They're always looking for some solutions because, quite honest, we've never really invested a whole lot as a nation into better understanding the health of honeybee colonies. Federal regulation. Here I said some concern. I can say that concern is growing, and I'll get to that in just a bit. State and local challenges, absolutely. We are seeing a lot of legislation and statutes being offered at the state level. Actually, just yesterday, and the reason why I had planned on coming yesterday, but I had to be a witness for a hearing in Maryland yesterday talking about this very topic. And then the big concern certainly is regulation through retail. Essentially, the consumer gets to a place where they just won't accept it. They've been convinced that it's something that's really bad, and then we can no longer use the products. And as I mentioned, the number of issues why we think these products are important, and we also think they're safer. I'll also say, we're always looking for, our industry doesn't make money on these products, on these chemicals. They are a cost. They're an input for us. Are we always looking for other opportunities, new products that advance us as far as still being able to control our pests, but have lower environmental impact? Absolutely. We're trying to work with the chemical companies. We are certainly working with IR4, who puts a more focus now on biopesticides. These are all things we want to support. The challenge is that if we look at like neonics, or kind of like I mentioned, the new kid on the block, and we look at that as progress, but it's constantly attacked. And we, as a minor crop, don't hold a lot of sway with the chemical companies as far as getting them to work with us so we have new products. They're going to say, you're not worth our time because it creates too much trouble and too much cost. Now all of a sudden, we're stuck with older chemistry and we're not moving forward. And so that's why we really need to have this robust conversation. And we're looking to all of you to do that. Sorry, I had to do that. So I mentioned the regulatory and administrative action concerns here. And there's some pros, but mostly cons. So the White House has a task force that they put together last summer. The administration put out a memorandum on pollinator health. And it brought together something like 13, 14 different agencies, led by EPA and USDA. So we work very closely with EPA, we work very closely with USDA, and we do know that there are some things that we're concerned about. So EPA will be making this announcement along with the White House initiative. We're expecting it to come out sometime in April, likely somewhere along either Easter, potentially Earth Day, something like that. And EPA is going to put out the suggestion. They'll be open for comments, but new label language. Maybe many of you have seen the bee box, that guidance. Well, a lot of that language will be likely included into label language. So it makes the expectations for using these products a lot higher and a lot tougher, especially for our growers, because our stuff flowers hopefully all the time. So they will likely, this new language will not just apply to neonics. They're looking at it to be pretty darn broad, because we know, and they know, there are other insecticides that can also kill bees when used not appropriately. So they're going to be including them somewhere probably in the range of 1,500 to 1,700 different products. And then they're also going to have an expectation for state pollinator plans. So, which sounds kind of weird, and I won't spend much time on that, but basically it's creating the opportunity or the option for the states to get involved, both the ag sectors with beekeepers, getting in a room, working through their issues, and focusing on communication. Because the sense is that communication, if we're talking about when the applications are being made, where the beekeepers are, and we're all talking, that communication in itself is a mitigation. So the state pollinator management plans are the kind of the guidance. We've been working with EPA and other crop groups on trying to provide some of that guidance that EPA will then either bless or not. And then it will basically go to the states and say, okay, get busy. Here's the guidance. Here's how you can do it. Get your stakeholders together, move forward, and let's figure this out, because ag needs to figure out ag's issues. Well, what are we doing as an industry? What can we do? Well, I have here, and I'll just zip through them, support research. Okay, we are doing that both from our own affiliate, the Horticultural Research Institute, which I'll get to. Also, we are actively working with beekeepers on some of the federal programs. There's a Farm Bill program called the Section 10007. Makes me I always think of James Bond when I say that. 10007. But anyway, it's a program that deals with pest and disease of specialty crops, deals with many of our issues, and so we think there's an opportunity there for some funding. So we've been working with groups like Pollen Ear Partnership and some bee researchers from Penn State to help them get funding to answer some questions. Stewardship practices. As I mentioned, there are things we can do as an industry, and I'll get to that in more detail. And then partnerships. So those are kind of the three legs of the stool out there. So on the research side, I don't know if any of you have seen this, but just I think it was on Thursday, we put out a press release that the Horticultural Research Institute has identified 4 researchers that they will be funding at a level of $125,000 total to begin that process. Some of it's to support some work they've already started. Some of it is new work, but also we're looking at it as an opportunity to leverage those federal dollars. We've been very successful as an association and working with researchers and leveraging dollars. We heard a lot about roses earlier today. Maybe some of you had heard about the Specialty Crop Research Initiative funded project for rose rosette disease. So we work very closely with the researchers and with the federal government to kind of help that along. And that group got about $4.6 million in funds to deal with that disease. They also got funds from other federal programs as well. In addition, roses, I'll just say this, this is the first year that they will be now included in the National Clean Plant Network. If you don't know anything about it, check it out. It's the first time that a landscape crop has been included into the National Clean Plant Network. We're really excited about that. Then also boxwood blight. Maybe some of you are aware of that issue and that disease. Still out there. That's kind of when I started with AmericanHort. That's what my first sort of duty was, working on boxwood blight. And we were successful in, over the course of about 3 years in helping to direct close to $3 million in funding to start to help us deal with that disease. So we're looking at this as an opportunity to kind of leverage and work with our federal partners. We're also, this process here with the research, we've coordinated with EPA. So EPA actually acted as reviewers. The pesticide registration group, they acted as reviewers for the project's proposals we received, so we feel really good that what's going to be funded is very sound science. Stewardship program. This is not quite ready for public consumption yet because it has to be approved by our board, but we had a task force come together and identify things, an industry task force. What can we do as an industry to be part of the solution? Right? We mentioned about all the problems that bees are facing, and we can't do much about varroa mite, we can't do much about some of the fungal diseases that they get, but what we can do is be helpful on forage and habitat, because we produce the plants, and we can also be smarter about how we use our pesticides. So on the forage side, we're looking for opportunities, and I'll hit on one at the very end, to partner with local or national groups to help them fulfill their agendas of creating more space for pollinators or manage that space so it's rich for pollinators. Also, this program has a foundation in integrated pest management. If you're a grower who wants to be in this program, you have to have a foundation in integrated pest management that's documented and has a significant focus on scouting. And the third piece is that there are practices that there'll be an expectation that on the plants that we know, and there'll be a list provided, that we know bees are most attracted to, as best we can tell now, recognizing this is, as we learn more, that list could change and grow or diminish, we'll see where it goes. But that basically, based on that list, for the plants that we know bees go to most often, that there are steps taken during their production process to reduce the potential of their interaction with insecticides, specifically systemic insecticides. So it's really more about timing. We don't want to tell people what product to use, but we certainly can know about what we can do as far as when to apply, and also maybe some recommendations on if you're going to use this and it has to meet this time frame, maybe this product or chemical class is a better one, those sorts of things. And then the partnerships. There's lots of partnerships going on out there, I spend most of my week now in different meetings on this issue, working with minor crop groups, working with beekeepers, working with conservation groups. Something we're really excited about is actually, this is out of the White House initiative, and it's kind of the group that came together named it, and we'll see if the White House likes it. We had a call the other day, and so far so good. But it's going to be the Pollen Ear Challenge USA. And the idea is we're going to challenge, the White House will challenge the public to basically include 1 million, I think it's 1 million new pollinator gardens. And so we're working with, it's AmericanHort involved, American Public Gardens, you can see the list right there, American Seed Trade. So we have a lot of diversity there, a lot of diverse interests there, but we all recognize that if we work together, we can find common solutions, and that's what we're working towards. I also want to say that the stewardship program that I mentioned, as far as helping on the forage, we really think it fits in perfectly with this group, and I can tell you everyone who participates in this thinks that as well, so I think we're moving in the right direction. Just want to put this up there. This is our kind of landing page on this topic. If you were to click on Want to Know More, it's going to take you to a bunch of articles that I think I've written. I think I'm the writer of, if not all of them, just about all of them, so please, I apologize, my grammatical usage, I'm sure, is off at times, but hopefully the information is still useful for you. And then also, we encourage you, if you want to, donate to support the work, the research we're doing, and also the public outreach, which we are working with a PR firm right now to take the stewardship program and other things and help it get out into the industry more and make people aware that these sorts of tools are available to them. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate being here, and good to see you all.